Welcome back, everyone, to Call Me CEO. This is the place where we celebrate women building businesses in their homes, outside of their homes, developing them into something new, and at the same time, being a mother, which we know brings in its own elements of juggle and growth and also superpowers, too. Today, we're actually sitting down with Alisa Sparks. She is the founder and CEO of Linden Creek, which is a luxury home staging and interior design company that has grown into a nationwide franchise helping women launch and scale their own design businesses. So, if this is a skill or an area that you are interested in, her story is going to speak to you specifically. What I love about her story is that she didn't just build a beautiful brand, she built something scalable, something impactful, and something that empowers other women to step into entrepreneurship with confidence and support. In this episode, we're dividing into what it really looks like to go from the idea of execution, the mindset shifts, as well as how to grow and create a business that creates with strategy and freedom. So let's dive into this episode and make sure you are subscribed so you never miss an episode. So, you want to make an impact. You're thinking about starting a business, sharing your voice. How do women do it that handle motherhood, family, and still chase after those dreams? Well, listen each week as we dive into the stories of women who know. This is Call Me CEO. Alisa, thank you so much for coming on Call Me CEO. It is so good to have you here. You are the founder and CEO of Linden Creek. And we just had a little chat behind the scenes, and you were telling me about how you originally started in finance for the military, which is such a jump of brain work, using numbers and finances and big budgets now, then going into like the creative and the design. And I just can't wait to hear how that happened and the passion and what came behind that. So please introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit more about you and how you went from finance maven to design queen. I want to hear it all.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to get to spend some time with you and our conversation ahead as well. Yes, I'm the founder and CEO of Linden Creek. We are a home staging and interior design franchise, but I am a numbers girl and numbers geek at heart. You give me an Excel spreadsheet and I will entertain myself for hours, but also like mama in addition to that. So I've got amazing little kiddos. I've got four of them at home and juggling all of the fun of that and an incredible husband to go with it. So just doing all things life and enjoying that journey.
That's amazing. So, what brought you into the military finance world, first of all? I'm curious what your original passions were. They say if you want to tap into what your heart sings, really desires, is kind of go back into that age of like between 5 and 8 years old of like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Was it numbers or what is it design? Like, how did you end up in finance and then pivot to design?
Yeah, growing up, I actually wanted to do numbers. Like, I remember thinking a mailman was the coolest job because they'd like sort and organize things. And I just imagined one day when I'd get to walk around in stilettos and carry a briefcase, like that was the dream, right? So I've always loved numbers and enjoyed that side of it. And so that's where I started my career. I went to school, got my degree in finance. And did some corporate finance and then ended up working for the Navy and managing their aircraft budget. So these beautiful multi-million dollar budgets and had a lot of fun with that season. But what was interesting is I found in my pastime, I was really drawn to design. So I would read every design blog I could get my hands on. I remember like flipping through magazines and studying different pictures and trying to figure out like why did that look beautiful? What patterns could I find in what they were doing and how they replicated textures or colors. And then I would try it at home, do it, and I'd be like, oh, that is beautiful, that makes sense why that happens. And so then that turned into like, can I buy a really ugly house and renovate it? So I did that a couple of times. It was like always when I finished my 9 to 5, I found myself doing something to fulfill this creative itch that I also had that was a passion at the time, but I hadn't really thought about as a career before that. And I remember thinking, like, I don't have an interior design degree, so there's no way I could be a designer. But as we were in this journey, I was selling a house that we had flipped, and the feedback we got on it was the staging was really good. But it wasn't staging. It was just my furniture that I had collected and kind of designed over the years. And it was this aha moment for me of maybe I couldn't be an interior designer, but what if I started a company in staging? I didn't need a degree for that. There could be legs to this. Maybe it could work. And so I made the decision to try to build it. I kept my full-time job and I would take my Fridays off of work and I would go knock doors and try to build relationships and land some jobs. And then I would run my installs on Fridays on my day off of work just to see if there was proof of concept to this wild idea, right? And it turned out about 4 months into this like transition, I hit this crossroads of the business is growing. So I either jump and figure this thing out, or I need to step back because it's going to start to interfere with my 9 to 5. And so I decided to make the jump. It was one of the best decisions I made. And that was really the start of Linden Creek.
Wow. Okay, so rewind the clock for us a little bit. How long was it that you were knocking doors and then turning that into a substantial jump? Did it take months? Was it weeks? How long did
It
that
was
turn?
about a 4 month stretch
Okay.
of like seeing that conversion. I think, things take time, relationships take time to
Mhm.
build and evolve. So it doesn't happen overnight. But it also isn't something that has to take years to build and develop either. And so it was about a 4 month journey for me.
Wow. Okay, that's a big deal to make that transition. Was your partner at the time supportive of this transition for you to jump into something and leave your finance behind?
He was, and I was really grateful for that. He was wildly supportive of like, if this is what you want to do, let's go ahead and make that transition. We know we're going to have some sacrifices along the way as you're starting a new business, but here for it. And what was interesting is about 12 months into the business, we actually ended up getting a divorce. We have all the respect and have a beautiful co-parenting relationship today, but things did not work out between us. But in that season, I found myself we had moved into a new area and a new community, so I didn't know anybody. I had two little girls that I had to take to school and pick up from school every day, and a brand new baby business that was growing faster than I could keep my arms around. And so the question came, like, how do I do this? And I remember being this season of a little bit panicked, and I was like terrified of the idea that if one of my kids got sick, and I was at an install, I was like, what would I do? I don't have a backup plan. There's nobody that can come save me. And it was that moment that I was like, I need to hire a team, just as like my insurance policy for if one of the girls gets sick or if something goes wrong at school and I need to go be there, that like somebody can keep operating what's happening behind the scenes in the business. And so really early on, much earlier than I probably would have thought, I hired my first employee. And I continued to take that approach. So every time things kind of started to get busy in the business and I get closer to like that carpool timeline, I would hire somebody to take on those responsibilities and I delegate. And I remember thinking at the time, like, boy, this is not the way to build a business. Like, this is really a challenge and a disadvantage because I'm hiring so much faster and that's expensive. But I look back on it now and I realize that that was actually one of the biggest blessings for my growth in the business because it forced me to get out of the way. It forced me to train and to delegate and build systems so much faster than I probably would have if I had the option to work 85 hours a week, right? And that was probably like the secret sauce that built Linden Creek into this kind of systematic business that it is today.
Oh, that's fascinating. I would love to know, in terms of people who are hearing what staging entails, assuming we've never heard of it, what does that look like for install, takedown, prepping the house? Like what kind of labor is involved in a business like this?
Yeah, it's interesting. Most people hear staging and they're like, oh, you get to be in beautiful houses, putting pillows up and decorating. And we do. But the majority of the business actually happens behind the scenes. So there is, initial site visits and walkthroughs. There is a ton of design planning that happens on computer systems that allow us to kind of pick and source and select. But it also means that I have a really big warehouse that has pallet racking with lots of furniture. And so there are logistical warehouse operations that are just as much time, just as time consuming in the business day to day as the actual staging efforts. So most of our time and work on a project is actually in the preparation. It's in what's happening behind the scenes in our warehouse. And then we're out at an install and have it from an empty house to a fully staged home on average in about 4 hours.
Wow. Okay, because I'm thinking even as a single person, how am I moving a couch? Like that's from day one. I would like, what do you do? How did you do that? I don't understand.
Yeah, well, and we hired moving companies, so that was
Okay.
helpful for the muscles. But then the muscles leave, and you better pray to God that you don't need to move the sofa again. Because if you're doing it alone, right? So,
Okay.
and there are some tricks to the trade and some furniture pads you can use to help with things like that. But movers were definitely helpful for that initial operations.
So is
Yes.
that like a contractor relationship where they were partnered with you, but they're not a part of your business?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay.
And I think one of the things I've learned in my business is there's value in employees, but there's also value in contractors. So, like, if you can lean on expertise that you maybe don't need 40 hours a week, or even if you do, if you can outsource part of that business to something else, that can be a really great advantage.
Yeah. I love what you said about outpacing what you could have done on your own, getting out of your own way. What do you think was the most significant help in the position that you hired first?
Yeah, the biggest help for me in the initial position was I had somebody that was hyper focused. Their first role was like to be a designer, right? To design these spaces. And so their sole purpose was focusing on every home and every project. And that was beautiful because as the business owner, I was thinking about payroll, I was thinking about expenses, I was thinking about sourcing, I was thinking about what was happening in the warehouse, I was thinking about it, can I close this deal with a client? And then also, like, how do I make this home pretty? And all she thought about was, how do I make this home pretty? And so, what was neat is, they say you hire somebody and you expect them to perform at like 80%, and that's a win. And that was maybe the case on day one, but eventually she outpaced me. Eventually, she became a much better designer than I was because that's all she had to focus on. That's all she did. She got more reps in, she got more experience and exposure, and got to like hyper focus on this one aspect, which as a result made us as a brand look really good and beautiful and didn't have to worry about all the businessy side of things behind the scenes.
Oh, I love that answer. What is it with your financial background that made you a really impactful entrepreneur? Because obviously you understand finance as well. And in my experience of interviewing so many business owners, I would say that finance and accounting is one of the more challenging things because as entrepreneurs, we tend to be a little bit distracted in our thinking. We can have a lot in our mind all at once, but maybe miss the details. But with you having that as a passion and a background, what was the most significant strength that you brought into this business?
Yeah, I think it was the naivety that most businesses don't think about finance first. I walked in and I was like, sure, we need to be profitable. So let's see what our costs are. Let's pay attention to these expenses. Let's figure out, can I hire an additional team member? What is the cost going to be? What do I need to generate as sales? Everything that I had done before Linden Creek, the decision was made based on a mathematical analysis, right? And so when I came to Linden Creek, every decision I made continued to be based on a mathematical analysis and a reflection of what we were doing and a projection of where we were going. And I remember thinking, like, that's just how everybody thinks about business. And then I met other business owners and I learned, especially in design and home staging, a lot of owners come from the trade. So, like, they are good designers. They love designing, and that's fantastic. And that's their sweet spot. And then they're like, oh, shoot. And by the way, I got to make sure that the numbers work. Whereas I took it as like, numbers are going to tell me how I can make the design work. And so it was a different approach at business, which was really helpful and like allowed me to kind of grow fast enough to be stable in the decision making that I was doing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I can't tell you how rare that is because if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I want to do this kind of business because I love design, that's not a bad thing. But it does mean that you need to hire someone who loves the numbers because I think what happened for you is you were able to go with into it as the reverse. Like you went with numbers first, which in an ideal world, I think, I mean, it can go either way because passion obviously is what leads the business, but also understanding it from the nuts and bolts, the foundation first is so imperative. So I think that that's neat that you had that at the forefront, that it wasn't led by emotion, it was led with numbers, which is a great way to do business.
Yes, absolutely. I'm grateful for it.
Let's talk about how you grew your business to a point of wanting to do a franchise. What did that look like, and why did you decide to take that turn?
Yeah, so as I told you, I found myself in these positions where I'd hire somebody as soon as I needed to be in the carpool lane. And I still live my life like that today. Like I've got carpool this afternoon, right? Like it's a non-negotiable that I get to have in my life. But because of that, I did such a good job hiring and staffing and building systems that I accidentally worked myself out of a job. So about 5 years into the business, I found myself reflecting on my prior week and looking at the week ahead and realizing nobody needed me to show up. Like they were handling everything. And I was like, well, shoot, what am I supposed to do now? And I love working. It's my passion. And so I was like, I don't want to just like sit at home and twiddle my thumbs. And I don't want to get in their way because that's what I'm going to do if I show up and I'm like, what do you want to do? How about I come with you? Like nobody wants me to come with. So like, what is my next season and next step? And as I was reflecting on this, I was getting messages from other designers and stagers on Instagram that were reaching out and going, "Hey, how do you handle pricing objections?" Or what's a better way to store your mattresses in your warehouse, right? Like sometimes it was just weird logistics and operations things or sales strategies. And I realized we had found kind of a system and a solution to everything because I had to teach it. And they were things that other people were still trying to figure out the answers for. And so it was this aha moment for me where I was like, I love my life. I love the team that we've built. I love the clients we have. I love what my day to day looks like. Like I'm making a good living. And we figured this out, and I made a lot of expensive mistakes to get here, but we're here. What if I took that and somebody else out there is probably just like me that goes, I had my 9 to 5. I want to pivot. I have a passion for this industry. Is it feasible? And they would probably get there a whole lot faster if I gave them all of the lessons I learned. And so it was then the question of like, how do I convey that information and how do I get that to them? And so as I explored different options and ways to do that, a friend of mine brought up the idea of franchising. And originally I was like, no, I can't franchise. Like it's a creative industry. Like we're not a restaurant. This can't be a franchise. And then as I paused and I reflected on it more, I was like, we have systems to the way that we design. We have systems to the way we set up rooms. We have systems to the way that we price things, the way we hire, the way we do everything. Like this is absolutely a franchisable concept. And so we decided to bring it to market. My director of home staging at the time reached out and she was like, Alisa, I've always wanted to move to Charlotte, but I took this job with you instead. And I'm here because I love you and Linden Creek. Could I be your first franchisee and could I relocate to Charlotte? And I couldn't have been happier. Because for me, that meant this is somebody that I could trust that could give me really honest feedback on what was working and what wasn't. Because just because you have a concept doesn't mean that it's perfect, right? And I knew that. And so she started a location in Charlotte, North Carolina, and for 12 months I just watched her. And we'd connect every week or every other week, and I'd go, "What's working? What isn't working? What resources do you need? Where do you need more training? What are your pain points?" And at the end of the 12 months, I we kind of both looked up. She had 3x the sales that I did in my first year. And I went, holy crap, this worked. And
Wow.
so from there, we decided like there is something viable in this. Let's explore this and expand it. And so today we've got 22 locations across the country, and are just having the best time building a community. That's our big thing is like we want like-minded people that are passionate about this, but that like have the drive and the hustle, that can bounce ideas off of each other, that can collaborate, that can celebrate each other's wins, that can cry together in those frustrations, right? Like, but community is such a big part of what we do. And so that's what we're building, and loving every ounce of it.
Oh, that is so cool. I have so many questions. First, starting with, it sounds like you must be really proficient at hiring help. And I would imagine people who start a franchise, that's a big piece is starting it themselves, but then having help that is good employees and good stock. Do you have tips or advice on how to do that?
Yeah, I think we've learned how to hire better, and you learn that from making mistakes, right? Like not every hire I made was the right decision, and so you learn a lot along the way. I think one of the biggest things with hiring is when you hire for a new role, you have no idea what their actual skills they need to have. So, for example, when I hired my first stylists and designers, I was like, they need to be good designers. That's great. And that was sort of where the buck ended. I was like, that's what I'm looking for. But the reality is, like, that wasn't very important. I could teach that. What was important is they were fantastic with customers because real estate agents would like show up at the house and be like, wait, I don't like the blue pillow you picked out. And I needed them to be able to say, no, the blue pillow is going to be great. And here's why. I needed them to be fast because this is a really fast moving environment. And if you overanalyze decisions, you're not going to hit deadlines. And I needed somebody that could problem solve because you're constantly working with whatever inventory is in the warehouse. And so you have to be innovative. And those were lessons that I learned over years of just doing it. And so one thing I would say is when you're hiring for a role, especially if it's a new position, give yourself grace that the first hires you make or the first decisions you think are important might not be, because over the years, you'll start to recognize what qualities and characteristics are actually important for a position. But the other thing is, especially if you're hiring for a new position, I highly recommend interviewing at least 10 or 15 candidates because the way they speak, how they speak about their responsibilities previously in their experience will educate you heavily on maybe some key qualities and characteristics you really need to look for. And then the other big piece of hiring is like culture is huge. You've got to understand who your company is as a culture. There's not a right or wrong, but like own it. We jokingly say at Linden Creek, like you have to be a little crazy here. Like we are go-getters. We hustle. We like think about Linden Creek on Saturday mornings and Friday nights because we love what we do. And so if you're a little crazy like that, like you're gonna get fit in well. If you're not, that's totally awesome, but like probably not the right fit. And so just understanding who you are as a team and what you're looking for and conveying that is half the battle.
Wow, that's good advice. And in terms of what apps you're using or services you're using for finding people, can you point us in a direction for that?
Yeah, it really depends on the roles you're hiring for. So we like to use LinkedIn for any like business professional sort of roles has been wildly successful for us. If you have a social media following, social media can be a great place. Oftentimes, these are people that have watched your brand and your company for years, potentially behind the scenes, and so they really know and understand you and your team's culture. And so that can be this kind of like forgotten source. But we've also used Indeed and some other options like that. The other thing I would say is if you're looking for really heavy hitters, don't be afraid to go after them. Don't be
Mm.
afraid to send people messages on LinkedIn and just ask, do you know anybody that, I admire what you're doing? Do you know anybody else that's like you that would be interested in a role like this? Because they might have a referral network for you that you weren't thinking about already.
Ooh, I love those tips. Would you say, in terms of those expensive decisions you've made or mistakes, what is one story that you could tell us that would help someone who's thinking about either starting a franchise like this or starting a design business? Is there a story that you can relate in terms of entrepreneurship that would be a helpful lesson that you learned?
Yeah, I will say the very first project I ever did is probably a great lesson for this. So I remember it was the very first job that somebody was like, "Yes, I want to hire you." So I was stoked. I remember meeting the homeowner and he went through kind of, "Hey, help me refresh this home." We were going to work with the things he had, and I was going to bring some extra things in. And I was sitting down, kind of thinking through it, and I was like, "I could get this done in about 4 hours. That's easy." I gave him a price. And he said, "That's fantastic." He goes, "Another staging company was in here yesterday and was going to charge 3 times what you charged." And I remember thinking, that terrible staging company, I have no idea who it was, but there, I was like, how could they overcharge and how could they expect so much money for this job? And this is ridiculous, but like, I'm going to serve you well. This is going to be great. And then I went back and I started prepping for the job and I spent 8+ hours shopping and sourcing for new products for him. I spent like $4,000 buying new products that were going to go into his home and then were going to get utilized. Got to the installation. I had to rent a van for the day. Got to the installation and I ended up being there by myself for 8.5 hours, moving crazy heavy furniture. The house was not set up or prepped the way it was supposed to be. So I was like hiding laundry on top of like doing the normal staging I was supposed to be doing, right? And moving crazy furniture into garages by myself. And I finished the job and it looked beautiful and the client was thrilled. The home sold like in days, over asking. It was like this beautiful story. They gave me the best review and they were like, it felt like a Pottery Barn magazine. We were so happy. And I remember driving out of that house at the end of the job and I went, oh my gosh, I think if I do the math, I made less than $10 an hour by the time I put all of the blood, sweat, and tears into this. I did not charge enough. And so I think, one of those big lessons early on is sometimes you forget that all of the things that happen behind the scenes, the thoughtfulness, the sourcing, the project management, the purchases that you're making, all of that, any overhead costs that you have to go into the price of your products. And someday you become an expert and you like know these things off the top of your brain, but you know them because of all the wrong mistakes you made or all the work you did before. And so there is value in that. And so I think one of the biggest things is like, just because you are new and you're walking in and you don't know anything on day one does not mean you shouldn't be charging a fair price. You have to really truly know and understand what you're delivering, and make sure that you're not selling services at a loss. I heard a stat the other day, that said like 40% of all businesses don't actually make money. And that to me was terrifying. Because at the end of the day, like if we're doing this for free, that is a lot of time and energy. And so make sure that what you are doing is something that is financially rewarding for you and providing you an income as well.
Yeah. Well, that's reassuring to hear that because where you were so money or numbers focused, even from the beginning, and you still made that error,
Yes.
I think that's
Yep.
reassuring to the rest of us who are like, oh, yeah, I should probably give myself a break when I did something similar and not knowing. Because if it's your first time, I think a lot of times we underestimate that kind of thing. Like, how long is this going to take? What are the resources that are going to be involved? What is it going to be taking away from if I put
Yeah.
my efforts into this?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's really helpful. I want to know, especially where you have so many children. I have four children too. When I tell them I have four children, people are always like, that's so many kids. How do you balance motherhood, personal life, and your business? What are some hard stops, some boundaries that you've put in place?
Yeah, I will say in the early years, the amount of like mom guilt I had for like, oh gosh, maybe I'm working too much. Maybe I'm not being the perfect mom. Maybe I'm not like showing up to enough field trips and things like that were insane. But there are a couple of things I've learned. One is that balance is not realistic. So it's really hard to try to achieve that. I think when I changed the way that I saw this quote work-life balance and changed it to like, we are just blended. Like we do family and we do work and we do them together. And sometimes they're on top of each other. And sometimes I focus more on being a mom. And sometimes I focus more on being a business owner. And all of those things are okay. It gave me a lot of grace for myself for the moments where like maybe it was a season of like business needs to be a focus. So I think giving yourself grace first and foremost. And the reason I say that is I get to have conversations with my kiddos now. My girls that have been with me since day one, and have watched this business build are now 12 and 11. And I talk about them, as we talk about the like original days. And I'm like, do you remember when Saturdays we'd have to go to the warehouse because mom was packing stuff and unpacking stuff? And they're like, those were the best days. And we'd have tea parties in the warehouse and it was so fun. And I'm like, remember how I'd have to like work till 7 p.m. sometimes because of whatever? And they're like, Mom, we loved that because blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, do you
Mm.
feel like I worked too hard? And they're like, no, you taught us that hard work leads to something else. And it was this aha moment for me when we had this really transparent conversation that I was the one that was the harsh critic. But really, all along, I was teaching them that when you push hard, you get a result, and you can build your own future and you get to build your own life. And so all of these years that I'm like kicking myself behind the scenes going like, you're not a good enough mom, you're not giving them everything, they look back at me now and they go, we're so grateful for everything you did because here's what we learned. So I would say like to the moms out there, like give yourself grace and understand you're probably teaching them something in this. But the other thing I would say that I've learned over these years is there are seasons where sometimes you just have to grind at work. Like it's a season where you have to push, it's a season you have to hustle. And what I've learned is if I know that season is coming, if I communicate that to my husband and to my children first, and I go, listen, I have to accomplish X. So for the next 3 months, like I'm going to hyper focus. I'm going to try to be the best version of myself. But if I'm failing or I'm not as present, I am sorry, but it's only for 3 months and then we're through it. When I set those expectations, I've also learned it works a lot better because otherwise they're like, what the heck? You're always working. What's happening? If they know that it's for a season and a period, all of a sudden they give me grace and they come along and support and they're like, cool, we know we get mom back probably in an even better capacity on month 4. And I've learned that that's been really helpful as we push and go through seasons of growth.
Oh, that's such good advice. I agree. Communication is key because if they have it set up in their mind that they know it's for a season, I think, especially where you're so clearly communicating what it is that you're trying to accomplish, then they want to be part of that program. They want to help you
Yeah.
to achieve that. They want to feel like they're part of the team and make this happen as well. So that is so cool. Is there something that you do, like morning, night routines, anything to help you stay grounded and intentional in your day to day?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think there are a couple of things. I heard something years ago from some book I read that like you need to have a practice of gratitude. So I had started it with my kids at a really young age, but it's one that like every time I feel like I'm struggling away, I like try to recenter and go back to. And so every day we say three things we're grateful for. And what's really funny is like, sometimes it's like I'm grateful that I have a swimming pool, right? But there was a season several years ago where our water pump broke and all of a sudden we had no running water to the house. So like couldn't flush the toilets, couldn't whatever, we handled it. But it was like 48 hours we had no running water. And for the next year, the kids oftentimes were like, I'm grateful for running water. And it's like, the simple things. And so I think, that simple practice of like just reflecting and pausing resets everything. It gives you a different perspective for what life really it is all about and what you should be grateful for. And I think the other time that like my biggest resets and my biggest grounding moments are always being out in nature. So sometimes weeks can be busy, but weekends I try to get outside, whether it's hiking or walking on the beach or something, being outside in nature and realizing that you're this little peon in this really massive world always gives me perspective. It humbles me. It gives me clarity on whatever problem I'm about to solve. And so I think those two things have been really big grounding forces for me.
I love that. Nature too, for me. It's so wonderful that everyone has access to it and everyone's nature elements are different. But to find something that really lights you up, even just a daily walk, can be
Yeah.
so rejuvenating. So I love that. Would you say that where you had intended for your business to grow and where you are now is what you initially thought would happen? Or are you in a stage now of even looking forward to what it can be? Like, where are you in that channel of like where you started, where you are now, where you hope to be?
Yeah, when I started, I had no idea I'd ever franchise. I think one of the lessons I've learned along my business journey is always open your mind to flexibility. Like when I had set my 10-year goals when I started the business, I was like, I want to be a staging company, I want to be a design company, and at the time, I wanted short-term rentals. We furnish short-term rentals, but like I don't own any in this season. Instead, we've pivoted to franchising, which I was never even on my radar. But I think one of the big things is in this business, not only do we franchise, but we've built our own proprietary software that we use to kind of operate our business model. We've now launched some different product lines in both art and pillows. So we have like custom manufactured some of these pieces
Cool.
and gotten to collaborate with local artists and like do these cool, unique things that I never saw in my bingo cards because there was a problem at some point in time in the industry that no one else was solving. And so I said, then let me solve it. And so I think opening yourself up to those opportunities of going, you can set your 10-year goals, but be flexible and open to like, where do you see a problem that needs to be solved? Because it might take you in a totally different path. So my path and my goals today is we want to launch at least 100 locations within a 5-year window. So we're like 3 years left. We'll see if we hit those goals. I think it should be really doable. But again, I welcome the like, that's the plan and that's the goal. But as we grow, if there are problems to solve, if there are things to innovate, we're excited to do that. But I think if you just go, we did it. Um, there's less purpose, and so we will always be striving for what's next, for how we can grow and support our owners, and allow them to have as beautiful of lives as they're desiring to have.
That's beautiful. If someone were listening to this and thinking, I want to start a franchise, what first, how would you describe that person? And second, what is the investment? Is that something, maybe time and money or whatever that looks like, whatever overall details that you could give us?
Yeah, franchising is not for the faint of heart. I will honestly say that.
Hmm.
Um, there's a lot that goes into it from a legal perspective. The franchising community started hundreds of years ago, unfortunately, with individuals that wanted to take advantage of um, other people. And so because of that, it's heavily litigated. There are a lot of laws to go around. And so there are expensive attorney costs from day one that continue forward to make sure that you as a business are in compliance with all that needs to be done. So for example, like every year we have to do a very thorough audit on all of our financials within our business, and then report that up to the world, and say like, this is what we're doing right or wrong. But there's time and money in all of that, right? So I would say if you are thinking about franchising, know that you are starting and building a brand new business because the way a franchise works is different than the way whatever your business model is today works. And so you're learning a new business model and how to sell and how to service and how to support. It's heavy in training and development and coaching. That's really what we are, is we are coaches and trainers in this season. We are therapists in those tough days. And so that's what our day to day really gets to look like, which I love. And in terms of investment, it's expensive. We attended a franchise event last month, and somebody openly said, like, if you're looking to get to 50 to 100 locations, you're looking at spending a minimum of $1 million before you ever get there, right? And so I think oftentimes people are like, oh, it's just, the initial attorney fees and the initial consultations, and it's $50,000 and I've got something, and you do. But if you're going to grow it and scale it and invest in the right people and grow the sales and things of that nature, it is a very expensive venture. And so knowing that going in of like, what are your true goals? How do you plan to get there? What does that look like? Is all very important.
So, if someone were wanting to join the company and start a location with you, specifically speaking to that person, what would you say to
Yeah.
them?
Yeah. So if you are like, hey, design sounds so fun and exciting, and I'd love to do that, but like, give me the playbook, get me there faster. We look for individuals that have drive and hustle, because that's who we all are. And so we want to build a community that continues to be like that, so that just happens to have a passion for design, that wants to own a business, though. Like, we want business owners that would have the passion for design, not necessarily designers that think a business would be cool. And so our initial investments sit anywhere between about $200,000 to $600,000. It's primarily in your furniture investment. And so it depends on how big you want to be on day one, and where you want to start and scale and grow. But we have opportunities still available throughout the country, and we're having so much fun again, like building this community, helping business owners launch their beautiful new brands in their communities, because it is their business, it's their baby, it's their relationships that they get to build, and we're just here behind the scenes helping them through it.
Very cool. I love that so much. Elisa, I want to ask you some rapid fire questions. And
Sure.
I didn't prep you for this beforehand. So, are you a morning routine or a night owl type person?
I am a morning person through and through. 8 p.m., I become useless.
So, what time are you waking up?
Um, Waking up somewhere between 5:30 and 6 a.m. So nothing too crazy, but like once I'm up, like my mouth doesn't stop moving, my brain's going a million miles an hour. I'm like ready to conquer the world.
Okay, that's awesome. What's one non-negotiable in your day?
Uh, Coffee. I turn into a terrible person if I don't have a morning latte, as terrible as that is. And so that is like part of my love language and daily routine.
Is that homemade or do you go out and get it?
It is homemade. We staged a house several years ago with an espresso machine because they had a coffee bar. It was a luxury home, and we didn't have a need for it after the staging. So I brought it home, and it has ruined me ever since. So every morning I make
You're
my
like,
own
this is
homemade
mine now.
espresso. Yep.
That's awesome. Favorite way to reset when you feel overwhelmed?
Going out in nature through and through. Put me by an ocean, stick me on a mountain, whatever it might be, but that is the best way to reset.
I love that. What is your current obsession? A product, a habit, or a ritual?
Current obsession. I'm really enjoying reading and coffee shops, the combination of the two. My girls recently, have really gotten into reading. They were on spring break last week, and they did a 24-hour reading marathon. And so we are finding ourselves in situations where we're like hitting bookstores every single week, trying out the latest new thing, finding coffee shops where we can sit down and read. And so that's been a heck of a lot of fun.
Oh, I love that. What's one of your favorite books you've read so far?
I love the business books. They don't read those. They read their own little romance. But 10x is better than 2x is one of my favorites that I've read recently that I really enjoyed, that changed the way I think about business.
That's a good one. Well, this has been so insightful. You've given us such real, tangible tips and advice. I've loved this so much. Please tell our audience where they can connect with you and find out more about you and your business.
Yes, you can check us out at linden-creek.com or on Instagram at linden creek underscore, just to see beautiful spaces or get to see a sneak peek of behind the scenes what's happening over here.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much. It was such a pleasure to interview you.
Thank you, likewise.
All right. And everyone who is tuning in, make sure you like and subscribe and reach out if you have any questions or a guest you would like to see on the show. It is what makes this podcast so special is the people that we interview. And I really appreciate you guys coming and listening today. We'll see you next time. Hey, CEOs, thank you so much for spending your time with me. If you found this episode inspiring or helpful, please let me know in a comment and a 5-star review. You could have the chance of being a featured review on an upcoming episode. Continue the conversation on Instagram at Call Me CEO Podcast. And remember, you are the boss.